The air in the Sulawesi highlands doesn't just feel cold. It feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. My family has farmed this patch of corn for generations, tucked between the climbing forests and the jagged peaks. This year, at 20, it was finally my turn. A rite of passage. My father, his leg shattered from a bike accident, gripped my arm as I packed. "The fire," he whispered, his eyes half lost in shadow. "Whatever you do not let that fire die. The things in the woods, they've been scaring the dogs, and they haven't found the Nangon boys yet." The warning in the water, I laughed it off. I had my rifle, my flashlight, and the arrogance of youth. On the hike up, I stopped at the stream. Beneath the crystal-clear water, something glinted. I pulled out a rusted, imitation gold button. A memory hit me. My father once snatching a gold ring I found in this same water and hurling it back. "Things come down from the hill," he'd said. "Best to leave them be." I tossed the button back, but as I rinsed my hands, 3 black leeches had already latched onto my skin, bloating with my blood. The first night, and the smell my watchtower was a skeleton of bamboo and rusted nails. I set up the can clangers, a rope of tin cans designed to rattle if anything entered the field. The first night was silent, too silent. By the second night, the steps began. Deliberate, heavy. I swung my light, but the golden stalks swallowed the beam. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't a wild boar. It was the cloying, acidic stench of rotting fruit mixed with something much worse, the unmistakable scent of a shallow grave. The tall shape on the third night, I saw it, standing 30 meters away at the edge of the forest. It was taller than any man, a pale, wavering outline that seemed to slip through the corn stalks rather than bending them. It didn't have a face, just a tilted head, listening. My cousin Rio visited the next day with supplies. He told me about the massacres in these woods decades ago. I looked at the river flowing from the north and realized. The buttons, the rings, the things my father feared. They were coming from the ravine where the bodies were dumped. A thick drizzle began. The temperature plummeted. I was shivering, drifting into a forced sleep, when I heard it. Creak, creak, the ladder. My heart hit my ribs like a hammer. I looked at the hearth. The fire was a pile of gray ash. It had died. I grabbed my rifle and pointed it at the trapdoor. "Go away," I screamed. The ladder groaned under immense weight. I didn't wait. I pulled the trigger. The roar of the rifle was deafening, filling the small shack with smoke. The sun didn't bring relief. It only revealed the damage. I climbed down the ladder with my rifle shaking in my hands. Where the thing had stood, the mud was churned up, but there were no footprints, only long, dragged furrows in the dirt, as if something heavy had been pulled toward the woods. I found the bullet hole in the trunk of a nearby tree, but there was no blood, just a thick, black sap oozing from the wood that smelled like the rotting fruit from the night before. I realized then that my shot hadn't missed. The thing just didn't bleed like a living person. I spent the morning frantically gathering wood, piling it high. I didn't care about the corn anymore. I only cared about the light. The discovery in the ravine. Restless and driven by a morbid curiosity, I followed the drag marks toward the northern edge of the field. The forest grew dense here, the canopy blocking out the sun. About 200 meters in, the ground vanished into a steep ravine. The smell became unbearable, a mixture of old iron and decay. Clinging to a root, I looked down. At the bottom, caught in the tangled branches of a fallen mahogany tree, were clothes. Not just rags, but a recognizable school backpack, bright blue, just like the one the youngest Nangon boy wore. It wasn't lost. It was discarded. And next to it lay a pile of those gold buttons, hundreds of them, shimmering like a bed of dead eyes in the shadows. The voice from the corn. I ran back to the clearing, my lungs burning. I needed to leave, but the truck keys weren't in my pocket. I had left them in the treehouse. As I reached the ladder, the wind died down completely. Then I heard it, a whisper, coming from deep within the golden stalks. "Help me." It was a child's voice, thin and cracked. "It's so cold in the well." I froze. There are no wells in this field. I called out the Nangon boy's name, but the voice only repeated the same line, over and over, getting faster and higher in pitch until it didn't sound like a human child anymore. It sounded like a parrot mimicking a scream. The broken circle. I scrambled into the treehouse and locked the hatch. I looked at the canclangers I had set up. One of the ropes was missing. I looked out the window and saw the rope trailing off into the corn, but it wasn't hanging loose. It was being pulled tight, vibrating with tension. Something on the other end was holding it. Slowly, the cans began to rattle. Not a random clanging, but a rhythm. Cling, clang, cling, cling. It was the exact rhythm of the funeral drums played in our village. Whatever was out there wasn't just a monster. It was mocking our traditions. It was learning how we lived so it could learn how we died. Night 4 arrived with a fog so thick I couldn't see the fire I had built at the base of the tree. I sat in the dark, clutching the kerosene lamp. Then the scratching started. Not on the ladder, but on the roof. Long, thin fingers scraped against the old tarp. And then, a voice spoke from directly above my head. It was my father's voice. "Open the door, son. My ankle is hurting. Let me in." For a split second, I reached for the latch. But then I remembered my father could barely walk. He couldn't have climbed the hill, let alone the roof. I stayed silent, tears streaming down my face, as my father began to growl, the voice deepening into a guttural roar that shook the bamboo walls. I realized the rifle was useless against something that didn't bleed. I remembered the old wooden chest. I dug through the musty blankets and found what I was looking for. The old machete my grandfather used to carry. It was rusted, but the handle was wrapped in a strange, dried vine that felt warm to the touch. My father had told me this blade was blessed by the village elders during the unrest decades ago. As I gripped it, the scratching on the roof stopped instantly. The air in the room felt lighter. The thing outside knew what I was holding. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pipe, and retreated into the darkness. Exhaustion finally took me. I drifted into a fever dream. I saw the forest as it was 40 years ago. I saw men in uniforms leading villagers into the ravine. I saw the tall man. He wasn't a monster then, just a tall, thin soldier who took pleasure in the tallies. But something in the forest, something ancient that lived in the mountain roots, had swallowed them all. It had fused the victim's pain with the soldier's cruelty, creating a sentinel that guarded the depths of the forest. I woke up to find the tall man standing right at my window, his pale face inches from the glass. He had no eyes, just hollow sockets filled with wet soil. The wind picked up, a howling gale that threatened to blow the treehouse over. My main fire below was being smothered by the rain. I watched as the embers struggled and died. As the last spark vanished, the tall man began to climb. This time, he didn't use the ladder. He used his long, spindly limbs to wrap around the trunk like a spider. I poured the remaining kerosene from the lamp onto the floorboards near the door. If I couldn't have a fire to keep him away, I would make a fire that would consume us both. I held a match ready, my hand steady for the first time in days. The hatch burst open. The smell of decay was so strong I vomited. A long, pale hand reached through the opening, its fingers ending in jagged, black nails. I didn't light the match. Instead, I swung my grandfather's machete. The blade hummed as it sliced through the air. It bit deep into the creature's wrist. Instead of blood, a spray of white ash exploded from the wound. The creature shrieked, a sound that felt like glass breaking inside my skull, and fell backward into the dark. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag and jumped from the platform, landing hard in the mud. I didn't look back. I ran. The price of the harvest. I reached my truck at dawn, my clothes torn and my body bruised. I drove back to the village in a daze. When I walked onto our porch, my father looked at my hand, the one still clutching the rusted machete. He didn't ask about the corn. He didn't ask why I was back early. He simply took the blade from me and looked toward the mountains. "You survived the watch," he said, his voice heavy with a terrible sadness. "Now you know why we still plant the corn. It's not for us. It's a bribe. If we stop feeding the field, it comes down to the village to feed on us. I looked in the mirror and saw a single gold button stuck to the mud on my boot. I didn't throw it away. I knew now that the forest never truly lets go of what it finds.